Hello everyone, and welcome to the second deck profile. As was with the first case, that was my starting Elementsaber deck, and well, after I lost to Ninjago, I switched decks, as you know. Or more of less switched the overall archetype and more of hybridized, and this is what came out as a result of that. Just like with the previous one, I will go through each card and its purpose in the deck, even if it does seem oddly redundant to do that for the Elementsabers. And hopefully we can learn stuff together along the way. Now, first off is actually the true core, one of the true core main additions to the deck. Besides the fact that, if you haven't noticed, this deck has shrunk from the 60 card deck it was to a 49 card deck. Is Elemental Grace Storago. Now this monster is interesting in the fact that it's another cannot be normal summoned or set, must be special summoned by its effect, which requires for all six of the 7 attributes in the game to be present in the graveyard. Doesn't have to just be yours though. Your opponent's graveyard also counts this count. When this monster is on the field, its attack and defense value is calculated by the number of different attributes in the graveyards, aka the number we just calculated to summon them, and times that by 500, which means this thing can have a base power of 3,500 if you have all 7 attributes present. Which in most decks wouldn't come up much, but in this deck, Elementsabers can easily fill that role. Additionally, for third effect, when your opponent would special summon a monster or monsters, you can negate the summoning by banishing 3 monsters from your graveyard, and then destroy all those monsters that were trying to be summoned. That can be costly, but also a very powerful plus, because again, that's stopping your opponent from having a powerful field, but that also risks making your Grace lose up to 1,500 attack power. So it's a risk reward there when you want to time it. Of course, it's a bit of a less issue when you have ones you can spare to throw away, but once you're at that type point, you gotta really make your decision hard. Moving on to the Lords, all of which are level 8s, with 2,800 attack and defense. I need exactly 5 monsters of their attribute in the graveyard. Exact, you can't have above or below that amount. Has to be 5 on the nose. First off is Rage. As stated, he, like all the other lords, cannot be summoned unless there are 5 monsters of his attribute, aka light, in the graveyard. And when he's summoned, he gets to destroy all monsters your opponent controls. In other words, he's a walking Raigeki, which is why I don't have a Raigeki in this deck, if you haven't realized. Needless to say, that's a pretty powerful effect to have on a monster. And this is a chaining habit you'll see with all the lords, is they have a powerful effect attached to them that activates when they're summoned. Some you can choose to activate, some are more mandatory. But yes, this card effectively acting as a Raigeki can do some heavy damage. And again, even after its effect is done, it can stick around the field and do some harm. But do be careful, like all lords, elemental lords, Rage has a condition that if he leaves the field, you lose your next turn's battle phase. Which means even if it's your main phase 1, you still get this turn's battle phase, that turn's battle phase, but you'll lose your next turns. So you really have to be careful of that. Moving down the list is Marlon Glacier, who I was able to show off last time. Again, as she was last there, she Marlon Glacier is the elemental lord of water. Needing dust water attribute monsters in the grave to summon it. When it's summoned, you can discard 2 cards from your opponent's hand, or their entire hand if they have less than 2. In comparison to the lords, this may seem pretty tame, but it can be pretty nasty because, again, hand size tends to dictate a lot of what you can and can't do, especially early on in the mid fight. Yes, in the later stages of the duel, Marlon Glacier gets really outed as not being that useful, but early on, she can cripple the opponent's ability to fight back or play. One example would be that, like again, when I fought Weevil for the boss duel on episode 5, I managed to rip his Parasite Paranoid out of his hand, just saving me from binding one of my mons. And that's kind of Marlon Glacier's strengths, is the fact that they can get rid of things that will be a problem later, or they may not get rid of anything at all. It's that kind of dynamic that makes Marlon Glacier kind of the iffy Lord to Ren that's not bad, but not good either. It can be good, but in some situations it can be rendered pretty much just a beat stick and nothing more. Moving on to an elemental lord that is completely dwarfed by Phosphor Rage, we have Pyrex, the fire elemental lord, along with the 2 usual outer snippets about elemental lords with the summoning condition, his in case requiring a fire attribute, and the whole battle phase loss. His effect is that when he's summoned, you can target one of the opponent's monsters and destroy it, and then both players take damage equal to half its attack. It's a Ring of Destruction. Needless to say, that means you can get rid of something that's going to be a real problem for you. And that's pretty much the point of it. It can also do some burn damage, which in the RP is a bit more important than it is in actual dueling, where the only life point that truly matters is the last one. But it still can help definitely clear the field. Again, though, this card tends to be dwarfed out by Frost Rage, just because, again, Frost Rage destroys all monsters your opponent controls instead of just one. Moving on, we have Windrose, one of the other super powerful lords. Windrose obviously being of the wind attribute. Their special summon effect is, to put it simply, Hoppy's Feather Duster. It destroys all spells and traps your opponent controls. Needless to say, that can really shift the tone of the fight. Because monsters tend to have protections up to their ears when it comes to being destroyed. Back row tends to not have that kind of defense built into it. And back row tends to have a bit of power in it as well, so it can really shift the tables. It's for that reason why Phosphor Rage and Windrose tend to be the 2 you see most commonly used in more proper builds of the Elementsaber deck, because they're just the 2 strongest because of the fact they're board wipes. Moving on, we have Umber Mirage. Now, my previous deck, which was my pure Elementsabers with a bit of warrior support, I mentioned how in that deck, Phosphor Rage is, well, Umber Mirage wasn't as useful as it could be. Umber Mirage, this effect again, being the dark attribute, is summon it when you have 5 darks in the graveyard. But when it's summoned, you can, when this card is summoned, you add, this is not optional, you add, there is no when card, so you gotta do this. You add 1 monster with 1500 or less attack from your deck to your hand. Needless to say, in Sabers, that's not that many mons. But in this deck, Grace counts as having 0 attack. My Alistair the Invoker counts as has 1000 attack, so I have 2 very valuable searches off of that. And even if I've gotten those 2, I can still pull out a good, decent chunk of my deck. Which is why it's usually one of the first ones I try to bring out, because A, it's not all that strong overall when it comes to its destructibility. but its ability to search can really get some of my bigger plays running much quicker. Which is kind of how a search monster like this would be in the first place. And then, moving on to the final Elemental Lord, we have Grand Soil. Grand Soil, obviously, the last attribute remaining Earth, has the effect to resurrect a monster from either player's graveyard when it's summoned. It's a monster reborn. And that can be really powerful. To the point that it, alongside with Marlon Glacier, tend to be the two that are sided, while Pyrex and Umber Mirage tend to not be sided as much. Because, again, oops, when my Frost Rage or my Windrow is in my graveyard, well, now I can just resurrect her with Grand Soil. And now that that Windrow is summoned, or Frost Rage is summoned, there's one front row or back row gone. And I have 2 level 8s that can go into an Xyz. Or if you're doing MR5, a Link. So it definitely has its power plays. And again, being able to rip your opponent's ace monster from their own graveyard can be pretty fun too. Anyways, now that we finished up with the Lords, we have gone almost basically out of the cards that have to be special summoned and are out now into the rest of the deck. Starting with the monsters that you would rather want to special summon, if able. The level 6, the only level 6 Elementsaber Liamana. A decent attacker with 2400 attack and 2100 defense. Its real strength comes from the fact that it can be special summoned by discarding 2 monsters from your hand. And if those 2 monsters, if any of those monsters are Element Sabers, depending on those attributes of those sabers, you get specific protections, which he doesn't just keep to himself. He emits to any and every monster you control that has Element Saber and or Elemental Lord in its name. So, and those protections are, if you send an Earth or a Wind, you get cannot be destroyed by battle. War on Fire cannot be destroyed by effects. And Light and Dark cannot be targeted by card effects. For this reason, by how passively strong that can be, in the sake of the RP, I was only allowed to have one of these. Because imagine, basically my entire field being indestructible, unaffected monsters that can't, well, indestructible monsters that can also not be targeted by card effects. It becomes immensely harder to take them down. Meaning you have to be really careful when these 2 of these are on the field, which is why a lot of builds, when you're playing proper, will run 3 of them because you want to spit these guy out as fast as possible and make sure you can get 2 of them out. Though that tends to take 2 turns because Mana has the stipulation that he can only use this effect once per turn, and it's a hard once per turn to root. Needless to say, as the captain of the Knights, he can be pretty powerful. And it's hence when I try to bring this guy out as often as I can. Moving on, we have our second Element Saber, Mohu. As the Element Saber with the highest attack value and literally no defense, it's pretty obvious what you do with this guy when you summon him. But he's one of the only 2 of the Element Sabers with a quick effect. His being that he's a Book of Moon. Because all Element Sabers have an effect that let you discard a card Element Saber from hand. Well, besides Mana uses any monster. But all the other sabers has the effect that they can discard a saber from your hand, and then you can get an additional effect. Along with that, all these sabers that are level 4 and below can also freely change their attribute till the end of the turn while they're in the graveyard. Which plays into how you summon and get access to having 5 attributes in the graveyard to summon all your lords. More uses, again, just send an MS Saber from your hand to the graveyard, and then, well, you choose a monster in the field and you force it face down. It's Book of Moon. Needless to say, Disrupt is pretty useful, since it can break up your opponent's field. And again, as the strongest attacker, it has its uses even in a bit of a later game, even if you're out of sabers, because it's still the strongest non-costly monster to summon out of all the sabers and lords. Moving on, we have one of the second major change to the deck is the addition of Alistair the Invoker and the Invocation engine, with Alistair the Invoker at its center. Alistair may not seem like much if you look at him solo with his 1000 attack and 1800 defense, but the fact that when this card is summoned, he lets you add a fusion spell known as Invocation to your hand, which we'll get to later, is really powerful, especially since he is required to summon all but 2 invokes, well, all but 1 invoked, meaning he can strongly set up. Additionally, if you have this guy in your hand while you have a fusion, you can discard him, give that monster an additional power boost of 1000 attack and defense till the end of the turn. Needless to say, this guy can really bring the pain because the invoked archetype is pretty strong. I only run one of them because, again, I don't want him to take too far away from the sabers, and originally we did have a limit of 1 on Alistair. Well, more than a limit of 1 on the Invocation Spell specifically. But ran to the kind of point of having multiple Alistairs kind of childish and pointless. Again, he just goes into what is effectively the second half that has been added to this deck, and that is a pretty big deal for him. Moving on, we have Elementsaber Lapalaya with the highest defense value and basically next to no defensive attack with only 400 attack. Lapalaya's strength lies in the fact that he's a spell and trap card negate. That is his effect for the price of the cost. By sending that Elementsaber from your hand to the graveyard, he can negate an activation of a spell or trap card. Again, negation is one of the most nastiest things in the game. It is part of the reason why the game is so obnoxious right now. Because who likes facing against a field with 6 negates? Needless to say, it's like all Elementsabers, it's a soft once per turn. But it's still a pretty good effect, because again, it's a negate. It's also one, pretty much your big shield of the deck when you need defense. So there's that, and as a level 4, it means level 4 exceeds are open with it and Mohu in play. This is why the level 4s are more suited to be around during any stage of the game, because they can fit in any stage. While the others will start to show their situationality pretty quickly. Moving on, we have Elementsaber Mohu, the fire representative of the Elementsabers. His cost effect, in response to the cost of the Elementsaber, is that you can send another Elementsaber or Elemental Lord from your deck to the graveyard. This is heavy setup because, again, sending a saber, getting you to send another saber. If someone destroys Mallow, hey, you have 3 out of the 5 you need in the graveyard. And if you're wondering why would you send the Lord when they have the whole stipulation that when this must be special summoned by a hand, is, well, you'll see when we get down to the later parts, because these guys can be resurrected. And again, he's just your accelerator, which makes him a good early card, and near the mid and late game, you just kind of want him in your graveyard so you can feel out that attribute. He can still be a good attacker because he has the second highest attack out of all the normal sabers, but again, his main emphasis is the fact that he can help accelerate your game state to getting much closer to that place where you can use your lords. Moving on, we have Elementsaber Nelu, who is our War representative in the Elementsaber deck. As response to the cost, now this is important, the that, unlike the others which just say you can send, this one is when these two are in specific differently. And this is one of the only two Elementsabers that specifically have it written differently, so that it is so strictly part of the cost that you cannot activate these effects if you don't already have the condition already met for the second half. Because what Nehlu lets you do is by sending an Elementsaber from your hand to the graveyard, you can add a Elementsaber or Elemental Lord from your graveyard back to your hand. Again, this is why sometimes it may be useful to send a Lord with Mallow to the graveyard. Because then, hey, send a Saber, get a Lord. But if you didn't have a Saber or Lord, it may not seem kind of pointless to drop one and then just pick it back up, but once we get to as the last spell in this deck, you'll see why that had to be made. Then, besides its whole effect, which is somewhat situational, mainly acts as a filler for trying to help fill up the graveyard more than it is in the fighter. Because it has the middle ground of the all stats, essentially. It's not that good for combat. And its effect can recover, but it gets dwarfed out by an effect that is much stronger. Which will be the next saber after the... will be these two sabers down, because I still have to do this one before I can talk about the one that basically renders Nehlu pretty helpless. And that other one is Elementsaber Makani, probably my favorite saber to use because its effect is really good. In return for sending that the Elementsaber from your hand to the graveyard, Makani can let you add an Elementsaber or Elemental Lord straight to your hand. This dwarfs the need for Mallow to send a Lord to the graveyard, because hey, I can just send a Saber, get a Lord, and then whoops, now I'm one step closer to getting my graveyard filled up, and now I have one of my cards that will be brickish if I draw into them, now in my hand, and now out of the way of being drawn, so I can have a chance of drawing what I need. Or I can, again, in early stages, send a Saber, add another Saber, thinning the deck, and increasing my odds of getting something I need later down the line, while also being able to more effectively fill up my graveyard. It's combatively, its attack and defense aren't great with only 1300 attack and 1200 defense. But as the searcher, its whole purpose is to fill up your graveyard as quickly as possible. So you don't need to worry about as badly if you lose him, but he can be also really good if you can keep him around with mana, mana. Because he can easily get you all the Lords pretty dang quick. Moving on to the last of the Elementsabers, we have Elementsaber Aina. Elementsaber Aina, being the representative of the Earth attribute, has a pretty powerful late game effect, but I've rarely gotten the chance to show it off. You see, by paying the cost, again, this is where it's specifically a cost, so you have to already have the condition met. You can resurrect an Elementsaber or Elemental Lord in the graveyard. This means you can set up for all kinds of shenanigans, or bring a destroyed Lord back to be able to pop its effect off to do heavy influence. Or you can bring back Makani, go into an Xyz, or bring out another Saber and do some other shenanigans. It's really decent and can be very game-changing to pull this effect off in the late game, but in early and mid, it's not as strong as you'd like. Which is why it's a kind of an iffy card, but hey. In this deck, which is not going to try to beat the opponent down that fast, or at least the old one was, it matters less so. In this deck, she matters less because this deck is designed to be much more aggressive. But it's still a useful effect that can save you. Because again, Resurrection is a very powerful ability. Especially if you bring back something that can immediately break the board. Break the back row. Make your opponent lose their powerful handful of hand traps. Resurrect another monster! You see where this thing gets pretty cheesy with how much it can do. And as I mentioned before, every single Elementsaber that is level 4 below has the ability to change the attribute. This is designed and why I have 2 of each of the 6 base sabers, so I can quickly get to the point where I have 5 sabers to summon. And if I have all 12 of them in the graveyard, well, hey, now I can easily spin around attributes and still getting the ability of having all 6 base attributes still in the graveyard, so it's pretty useful. The last of the monsters is something that's become kind of a staple, and it's something people get really annoyed at seeing in my deck. Little Trooper, a level 1 monster with 500 attack and 500 defense. When this monster is destroyed by battle, you can special summon a level 2 little warrior from your deck and face on the defense position. Needless to say, this is the only 3 I run, because this is an RP deck. You really shouldn't run 3s unless you need to, but this is, by nature, should be run at 3 at all times of running. Because you lose 1 Little Trooper, you summon the next, then you summon the next, and then you can summon out either your Makani or your Aina. Meaning that you get basically a 3-strike shield that can protect you. And you effectively make your deck smaller than the limit we had, which is we had to have a deck that was no smaller than 48 cards. So by having these guys here, I effectively make my deck 46. So they're pretty useful, they're defensive, they can make you last a bit longer. So they definitely have their uses, and people tend to get annoyed with how obnoxious they can be. That covers the monster segment, which is a massive bulk of the deck, with it being 24 out of the 49 cards in the main deck. Now moving on to my spells, first is my Galaxy Cyclone. It can destroy a set spell trap when you first activate it, then you can pop it in the graveyard to destroy a face-up spell trap by banishing it. So it's 2 spell card destructions that are both situational, but both can be useful, without having to pay the cost of Twin Twister's discard. That's kind of why I read it over having a Twin Twister. That, and I have a different Twin spell trap destruction card in the deck, which you'll see later. And originally, Harpy's Feather Duster was still banned for us, but that has changed. So, for the time that this deck was made, this card was what I ran. Next is the Reinforcements of the Army, or Rhoda. It's a search spell that lets you simply add 1 level 4 lower warrior from your deck to your hand. Let's see, of all my level 4 lowers, only 1 of them is not a warrior. Which again, effectively makes my deck 1 card smaller, will also let me choose what I want and what I need at the time. I mean, it can really either accelerate my plays, help me get exactly what I need, or help me stall. So, it's a useful card. And a card that is pretty much in every deck I run in an RP, 1 day apiece. Each player draws a card, and either player takes damage until the end of the opponent's next turn. Sure, it basically negates itself out with any kind of hand size loss, but you're giving your opponent a card. The benefit is, again, neither player can take damage for a while. Because that means that if you don't have a good hand, oh, I can 1 day draw a card, even if it's not good, well, I now have another turn to pull Miracle out. Or if I'm already in a strong position, I'll just pop it during my second main phase, so I can't get hurt at all during until my turn comes back around, and well, now my opponent can't really do much to hurt me, and since this is RP, life points is the main way to win, so it gives me a turn to have some time to brave a 1 day of peace. Now we get into that Invocation Spell I mentioned earlier. This card can be a bit complex, but for how we're using it, we basically get its full power completely. First off, it's a fusion card, so it's fusion summons monsters from the deck. You use your hand and you use cards from your hand as fusion materials. And for that, you just send the cards from your hand to the graveyard. But if you're sending an invoked monster, you can also banish monsters from your field and graveyard. And that can be pretty useful. Because again, the ability to pull from your field and both players' graveyards can be, well, pretty heavy, since it means you can rip something out of your opponent's grasp and get a card that counters that playstyle, because the invokes have a tendency to counter what they are the attribute of. Or counter or emphasize, I should say, what they do. So they can be pretty dang strong. And again, if this card's in the graveyard, by returning it to the deck, I get Alistair the Invoker, who's currently banished because I used him as a material, back to my hand. And since Alistair searches Invocation upon being summoned, it's a cycle, which is why you can only use each effective invocation once per turn. As is one of my only two fusion spells, and is the main way I fusion summon, you can kind of see where its power lies in the fact that I can dismantle my opponent's graveyard, or if I need to, I can change one of my Elementsabers to an attribute that I need, and then invoke it into the invoked that I need. And the real power of that will show once we get into the extra deck. Card of Fate, this card's honestly been so confusing for a lot of people, but it's pretty fun for RP. I've said this a few times in all the duels because it's a confusing card, but each player chooses one card from the deck, then each player combines it with 4 additional random cards that are chosen from the deck by an opponent. Basically chosen blind. Those 5 cards that have specifically been pulled from your deck get mixed together. So you have 2 piles of 5 for each side. You add and reveal and add one of those cards to your hand, and the rest go back in your deck and get shuffled. What this effectively means is that you have a 1 in 5 chance to get what you want and or need, and hey, if you don't get it, you can still get something really good out of it. It's a fun little card that can turn the tables, either for you or against you, so it's fun for RP. Would I recommend it for an out of RP? Probably not. It's not that great of a card in out of RP, but in RP it is pretty fun to use. Going to my only other fusion spell on the deck, Fusion Substitute, can only use fusion summon using monsters on the field. And you can banish this card from the graveyard, then you can target a fusion monster graveyard, return it to the extra deck to draw a card. So hey, you get a draw off of it. Once your fusion monster you summon with it goes down, but you can only fusion summon monsters on the field. Which doesn't affect me when you realize why I use the fusion summon with it. Which again we'll get to when we get to the extra deck. Moving on, we have Gold Sarcophagus. This card takes its place over Terraforming because I don't like running Terraforming when I don't run that many field spells because, whoops, I go through all my field spells, I get draw off Terraforming, it's a dead card. So instead, I choose to use Gold Sarcophagus. I banish 1 card off of my deck face up. Then in 2 turns, I get to add that card to my hand. This also balances more out the power of one of my field spells. And you'll see why. Because it means that my opponent has a chance to react. Moving on to the last draw spell of the deck. Graceful Charity. Now we had a choose run rule that said you had to choose between Graceful Charity, Hand Destruction, or was it Card Destruction? It was Card Destruction. Sorry about that. I always get confused between those two. And I chose Graceful over Power of Greed. Because, well, Hand Destruction is iffy on how powerful and useful it can be. Power of Greed is a +1. But the cost of Graceful Charity is not a cost for me. Because you draw 3 cards, then you discard 2. Which means I can effectively get 2 Elementsabers in the graveyard for free and then fill my hand up with new cards that I can hopefully do something with. It keeps your hand the same size, which is its weak point. But the fact that you get 2 sabers in the graveyard can really, really turn the tables in your favor. And even if you don't have sabers, hey, if you have a card you don't need, whoop, there it goes. Don't need to worry about it anymore. Anyways, moving on, we have Monster Reborn. Same kind of ruling of why I have it to Grand Sword applies, because again, Resurrection is powerful. Being able to bring back something valuable to your side from either player's graveyard can really turn the tables. Power of Duality. This card has shot me in the foot before, and it can also help you before too. Because it makes it so you can't special summon for the rest of the turn, but lets you see the top 3 cards of your deck and add one to your hand free of charge. Again, shrinking the size of your deck down, giving you a bit more control over what you're gonna get. You use your turn to special summon, but in the early game when I'm not doing all that, that's not that big of an issue. In the mid and late game, it can be sometimes problematic, so I don't want to, but then hey, and then I have a cost like it Father for Graceful if I don't have enough sabers or don't want to burn a saber. So there's that. Moving on, we have Burial from a Different Dimension. Originally I used the powerful Quiv, but I didn't as often get 3 or more monsters banners as I thought I would, so I switched to Burial, so it'd be less of a brick in the hand. Because unlike powerful Quiv, this card works up to 3, so I can do 1 or 2 or 3. And what it does is it lets you return monsters that are banished back to the graveyard. This is even more beneficial for me over part because it means, hey, I gotta use Graceful to remove 3 of my sabers that and make her lose 1500 attack. Well, let me just bury over a different dimension and put them back. This makes the risk of having to sacrifice sabers and by banishing them much less of an issue. Which is simply why it's there. Now we move on to the field spells with 1 copy of Magical Meltdown. When this goes activated, you can add Alistair, so it's a way to get Alistair out quick. It also protects your fusion summonings, because your opponent cannot activate cards to respond to it and cannot activate when a monster is summoned this way. So it basically says you can't screw with my fusion summoning, which can really annoy your opponents when they can't bomb-less it. Though its main use again is just to be another way to search Alistair so I can get into my invocation stuff quicker. Now getting into the main field spell of the deck, and the reason why I say that the costs on these Elementsabers aren't just not a cost, but actually a benefit, is the fact that is this little bad boy, Palace of the Elemental Lords, a field spell with 3 effects. First, a passive effect that gives 200 attack and defense to all monsters you control for each attribute in your graveyard. So that could be 200, well technically down to 0, all the way up to 1400 attack power. Which again, with 5 monsters in the field, times that by 5, you have 7,000 additional points of damage on the field. That's a lot. And can make your Elemental Lords space over 4,000 or over 4,000. And Grace can chill at 47,000. Well, 4,900, which is nasty. So again, it just gives you the ability to go from trying to technically build your field and use these effects to get advantage to being able to run them over. Then for its second effect, as a once per turn, you can add an Elementsaber from your deck to your hand. The drawback is you use the next one's battle phase. It seems bad, but again, free Alistair, free Makani. Get Alistair with a search, and it gets easier to summon him, and you'll see why quickly. Because the third effect is once per turn when an Elementsaber would cause you to send cards from your hand to the graveyard. You can send that many Elementsabers from your deck to the graveyard. The way this counts is that even if you have a 0 hand, it still lets you use your monster's effects. So you don't have to worry like, oh, I need to have the condition met, then I can treat these 2. No, they're basically treated from the get-go as though they're in your hand. Which makes mana is 2 costs, a joke, and is honestly even super beneficial. And again, this is why these two, Elementsabers and Nelu, can't resurrect unless there's something on the graveyard. Because imagine, oh, I have nothing in my graveyard. Elementsaber, why not me just send mana to the graveyard instead, so I can just add mana to my hand instead. You kind of see the point of why that had to be made the way they are now, those two. These moves like stack for some nastiness, because again, with a Makani in the field, you search, send a saber from your deck, thinning it down, then you add one of those bricking lords to your hand, and well, now you're much closer to getting where you need to be. And with Lapalai and Mohu, your opponent tries to engage shenanigans. Now I can just during their turn send a saber from my deck, thinning my deck out, and stop them in their tracks. This is why Palace, like mana, has also been limited to 1 for the sake of the ERP. Because in an actual deck, you would run 3 of the Palace and 3 of mana for a very good reason. In fact, the main actual builds of Elementsaber decks tend to focus around spinning this card out basically first turn. There's so many decks that emphasize trying to have as many ways as possible to getting this field spell out onto the field. For good reason. With that covered, we move on to the trap cards. With my first one being Reinforced Truth. It lets you inactivate special summon level 2 warrior from your deck, but you can't conduct your battle phase that turn. Here's the thing, you can use it during your opponent's turn. You don't have a battle phase during your opponent's turn. Meaning you can basically spit out one of your little troopers out and go, no, I'm going to be safe, and then, well, there's the 3 shields that have to break. Or end of the turn, oh, I just want to summon my Makani out. Hey, now I can now start searching during my turn. So its effect is pretty useful. Moving on is Wabaku, one of my defensive traps. Because again, when it's activated, no battle damage can be taken, and you can't have your monsters torped by battle. 2 things which are really useful to me. Keeping my sabers on the field so I can keep popping their effects off. And not dying. Pretty simple why I run it in RP deck here. My last of my spell trap destruction, my Heavy Storm Duster. You can target 2 spell trap cards on the field and destroy them. It has the same cost as Reinforced Truth. The whole con disappears in the same manner of, hey, just use it during your opponent's turn, you don't have to worry about it. Defense draw. It seems not that good at first, but hey, I can get attacked in the face, so let me just negate that attack effectively. If it's direct and draw a card, I'm going to lose a monster, while I would just negate it so I don't take damage from that attack, draw the card. It replaces itself and lets you take no harm. So there's no real point in worrying about it filling up your hand, because no matter what, you're going to basically be able to survive a bit better, and hey, it replaces itself. So you don't have to worry about that either. Going on to my sole Mirror Force of the deck, I chose Quaking Mirror Force. All the people for the DDF RP could only have 1 Mirror Force, 1 version of it, and only 1 copy of it. So what I chose was Quaking because, hey, basically leaving your opponent defenseless, because this is a non-link format, because we're playing pre-link for this RP, is hell, pre-pendulum too, at that fact. That with Quaking, you just force your opponent's monsters into, and with this trap card, you send all the opponent's attack position monsters face down in defense position, and they can't change. So you could basically render them their entire field completely unusable until they get a monster they can tribute summon, which is something that not people do these days anymore. So it can really screw your opponent over and buy you a lot of time. Drilling Shields. They gain attack, gain some life points. Pretty simple, and again, not dying, not losing a monster, or being able to avoid a direct attack, and instead turn that direct attack into life points means, hey, I won't die as quickly. Moving on, I run 2 copies of Transmigration Prophecy. It lets you return 2 cards from either player's graveyards. And that's important to know, is I can send 2 cards from my graveyard, 2 cards from my opponent's graveyard, or 1 from each, back to our decks. And with how this works, that means I can say someone tries using Monster Reborn to bring back the big bad, the monster. I just transmigrate. Oh, that monster you just targeted, it's going back to your deck, which means that Monster Reborn now fizzles out. Additionally, it is so funny to see people try to finally take up my 3rd and final load trooper, only for me to transmigrate the other 2 back into the deck. And watch them groan as they realize they have to punch through it more, because now they break that one, and then, hey, 2 more come out now you have to deal with. They can also recycle each other. You think that means, hey, you can never that guy, and you're kind of right. But again, because of how they work, they're not as useful as you think for staying alive without decking out. Unless you already have a field that's basically impossible to break. And both players are permanently at stalemate. So the chance for not decking out becomes an kind of boon to this card. Almost has, in fact, it has never come into play for me. There was talk about limiting this card just to avoid that whole I'm unable to deck out clause, or even banning it so you can't combo it with your Yugioh of Avarice like I do. But when you realize it doesn't come into play that often, in fact, it never has come into play, it just stops being a problem. Next, Scrap Iron, because Scrap Iron, and you negate that when after it's used, you reset, meaning that next turn, hey, I got another negate and another attack I can stop and survive. So, why would I run it? It's the card people love to use in RP, but people hate facing in RP for a very good reason. Moving on, we have my Yugioh of Avarice. This card's pretty simple, sending 5 cards only from your graveyard back to your deck to draw a card. Cannot send another Yugioh to the graveyard, back to the deck. But once you do that, and your deck is all shuffled, you can draw a card, which means, hey, I need all these cards back to have a chance. Let me send them back, and now I have a chance of drawing one. Hey, I have a move my transmigrations to the graveyard. Let's send those back. Hey, now I got transmigration in my hand. Let me use transmigration to get my Yugioh of Avarice back. So the card is designed to help me, again, get back what I need and get to a state where I can hopefully come back. And the ability for it to be recycled with transmigration is just the cherry on top. Moving on to the last card in the main deck, we have Elemental Training. A continuous trap card with 3 effects attached to it. First, its passive effect is that your palace becomes palace of the elemental lords cannot be targeted and cannot be destroyed. So, again, making your vital field spell not killable. Very, very, very useful. Its second effect, which also tends to come in a lot, is that once per turn you can send an Elementsaber, attribute a monster you control, and special summon a different monster from your deck to the field, granted as long as it's an Elementsaber of a different attribute. Again, deck thinning. And also being able to cycle through, like, well, I know my opponent's going to do some bad things next turn, so let me just get a Molehill or Lapalaya. Oh, the turn's over, now let me just cycle them out and get one of my, another Malo or a Makani so I can search or thin my deck out. And again, tipping the deck in your favor, it's super useful. Moving on, and its final effect, which I've only used a handful of times, is that by sending this card and your entire hand to the graveyard, something you usually don't have much of because you've burned most of your hand using your Saber's effects, you get to add elemental lords from your graveyard back to your hand. So if you have a hand of 6, well, there's all 6 of my elemental lords ready to bear for their fangs once again. Again, basically, getting into that level almost never comes up. But it can, and that fact alone makes it pretty powerful that I can just Get with the cards I can't use and can't save me. Get the lords that can save me back to my hand. Finally, we move on to the extra deck, which is 9 fusions and 6 successes. First off, we have Invoked Elementsabers. This card is basically showboating for me because you fusion summon using an invoked monster, aka all of these other guys besides, well, this one. And one other monster that was special summon from the extra deck. You know, the whole thing. This card is a heavy hitter with 3,200 attack and 4,000 defense. And it additionally counts as being Dark, Earth, Fire, Water, and Wind, along with its base of Light. And you think, oh, that doesn't matter, because that only acts when it's on its field. It's not like I can have that on my graveyard and be like, boom, now I have all 6 attributes lingering on my graveyard all the time. But you see, the effect comes in the fact that you can banish an invoked monster that you control or in your graveyard. And all monsters your opponent controls with that same attribute are also banished. So, hey, I have all of my other invokes and out of the game. So I effectively now have potentially 5 or 6 invokes I can banish to just clear my opponent's field. Oh, I don't have that option anymore. Let me just banish Elysium. Now you don't have any monsters. That's Elysium's power. And now we move on to the most infamous of the invokes, Mechabah. Once a level 9 light machine with 2,500 attack and 2,100 defense. And once per turn when a spell, trap, or monster effect is activated by sending the card of that same type of card from your hand to the graveyard, monster, spell, or trap, from your hand to the graveyard, well, you negate and destroy that banish that card. Not destroy, banish. Meaning, it's basically not going to be coming back for a while, at least. Again, a powerful negate that can negate anything pretty easily. You can see why it's dreaded. The most easiest... Next up is the easiest of the invokes to summon, because this is the most common attribute in my deck, is Invoked Majorlunka. It's simply a beat stick that's level 8 with 30,000 attack and 3,300 defense. There's not much more to it. Literally, there is not. The only non-invoked fusion in my deck is Guilty Gearfy, the Magical Steel Knight, and it's the monster I have my fusion substitute in my deck for. This monster can only be summoned using 2 warriors of different attribute. Yeah. I have that covered easily. But once per turn, when the card effect that targets this card that's activated, well, hey, negate that card and destroy it, a card in the field. So, again, negate means that card's going to go away anyways. So, hey, you try to use a spell that's going to destroy my... I will not negate that, and let's break one of your other cards in the field that's going to cause me problems. Yeah. Nasty. But if this card was using monsters that's only on the field, this is why I use Fusion Substitute, this card can make a second attack during each battle phase. Double hitting attacks at 2,700 attack. That hurts a lot. Even more so when you take into its last effect, which is once per turn during the damage calculation of this battles an opponent's monster. Banish a spell from your graveyard, which I tend to not need going back in my deck for the most part. And hey, half of your defense is added to your attack. This is base, not your original defense, half of your defense overall. So its base defense is 1,600. Get that up to 1,200 or 1,400 even. With Palace, and then it's a mono Alistair from your hand to the graveyard. Means that its defense stat in this deck can reach 4,000. And again, on top of that, you've already added 2,400 more attack to it anyways, and now you're adding another 2,000. You see its damage output now. This card can really clearing up if you let it. Which is why it is in the deck. Now, introducing the newest of the invokes, Invoked Agoides. When this card is special summon, this card can then be used only fusions have been using a fusion monster instead of an attribute. That's different. But what this means, though, is because otherwise it's pretty strong. When a monster card is special summoned, including its once per turn, if this card is special summoned or a monster is special summoned on your opponent's field, you can target one monster your opponent controls and destroy it. You can only use this effect once per turn, which makes sense. But again, that means, hey, I special summoned this big monster from my extra deck. Really? Well, it's gone now. Yeah, it can break your opponent's strategies up hard, so it makes them have to rethink their entire plan. Because they have to use something to force my hand to use this first. And then its secondary effect, which is even bigger, and is the reason why, even though on this 2000 attack you usually had this in attack mode, is that you can banish a fusion monster from your graveyard and make it gain an attack equal to that banished monster's attack until the end of your opponent's turn. Combine that with Magellanka or Elysium, and you have a beat stick that's 5,000 or 5,200. Before Palace boosts it even further. Again, White Hourglass can be either a really decent shield or can really wreck house. Which is why it is, again, like all the other invokes, which I have one of each in here. This is why this is one of the invokes I do like to get out. I don't get out Mechabah that much because I'm always burning through my hand and I will feel dirty abusing it. But I have no problem with Hourglass because there are many ways around her. But she can still bring the pain hard. Going on to another nasty little invoked is Perkatrio. The fire invoked gains 200 attack for each card your opponent controls. AK in a pre-pendulum format is 2,000 power. So for 300 attack, here we come. Plus Palace, well, you get the picture. But this card's real nastiness comes from the fact that it not only does it have piercing, but it can attack all monsters it controls. Not attack up to a certain number. All monsters it controls. So say, again, that my opponent had a Little Trooper. Perkatrio attacks it. Pierces through, does damage. They summon a new one. Pierce through, did more damage. Summons another one. Pierce through, does more damage. Summons the next monster, kill that, and do more damage on top of it. This makes a lot of defensive resummon monsters like Little Trooper basically a detriment. And again, being able to wipe out your opponent's big field of mons can really change the tide of battle. And that is why Perkatrio is a menace in its own right. Moving on to the defensive invoked, being Invoked Osiris, with only 1800 attack and 29 defense. This card cannot be destroyed by card effects, and it cannot be targeted by card effects. Also, this card can attack while in defense position, but unlike Super Heavy Samurais, it still uses its attack stat. Which again is only a mere 1800, but hey, buff that up with Palace to 30,000, and hey, you now have a blue eyes you cannot be killed as easily because, well, it kinda has 1100 more defense points than it does attack. And since it makes that so hard to kill by battle, and it's not destructible by card effects, eventually, there's not much they can do besides try to get somebody that can beat over it. Moving on to the next last of the fusions, we have Invoked Region, the Wind Invoked. This one has a simple effect, which is literally the same effect the Moyu has without the costs, which is a quick effect, Book of Moon. I already mentioned how annoying disrupts can be and how they can save you and also ruin your opponent, so I don't think I need to go into much more detail. Then you have the it's hard to put that in terms where it stands because it's super situational and kind of controversial if you use it or not, which is Calica, because it's only a level 4 with the same stats as Alistair, which makes sense because otherwise this is Alistair after he got corrupted and turned into a, well, you see right before you. But it is a Dark Door on legs that also messes with monster effects. which is its main purpose, is the monster effect one. Because this thing is surviving attack for the most part. Not unless you get scrap iron, in which case your opponent is going to be annoyed to all hell. Because that means your opponent, because a lot of plays that decks do requires the activation of multiple effects. So limiting how many times your opponent can use monster effects to only once is devastating. You get affected too, but hey, I don't need to worry about it that much. Because most of the time that would have been either, hey, summon Atlas to get the search off, or summon the Lord and do the mass devastation, but I can't summon the Lords, sadly, because he stops them because I use a monster effect in the graveyard. Which makes Calico only really comes out when I'm leaning heavily into the Invoked. With that, we covered all my fusions, and let's move on to the last bit, which is the Exceeds. Starting off with my two rank 8s. First off, I'll say the Sylvan High Protector. This is the one I least go into. Partially because it's level 8, partially because my other one's much nastier. That once per turn, you can declare top card name and next phase top card of the deck. If it's your declare card, add it to hand, otherwise send it to the graveyard. That seems not that good of effect. But I will call that what I want, or unless I really, really want the second effect, which is if this card is sent from your deck to the graveyard to the card effect, except during the download step, detach a material, and then target one card in the field and put that card on either top or bottom of the deck. Hey, you got a big indestructible monster? Where is it? Oh, there it is in the bottom of your deck. Yeah, it can really mess with your opponent. Like, hey, it can be any card, not just monster, but hey, goodbye Scrap Iron, goodbye Field Spell, goodbye anything that I know is a problem for me. And again, you pop it with its own effects because it's the only monster that kind of does that. Besides, well, mana, but by the time I got this guy out, this mana is already on the field. So it's just, hey, I either get the card I need or I just hurt you hard. But this card gets dwarfed because I have Aeon the Sea Castrum. 0 attack, 3000 defense. But a very, very nasty effect. Once per turn during either player's turns, yes, during both players' turns this effect happens, banish one random face down monster from your opponent's extra deck face up, and then if you do, this card's attack becomes equal to that banished monster. What that means is that I would lose the boon of having the attack power boost of Palace, but hey, I have a 1 in 15 chance of getting rid of the one card that could save them. And I get that effect off every single turn as the deck thins. The extra deck thins and thins and thins. Which means it severely limits the options, because even if they get rid of this thing quickly, there's still 2 cards from the extra deck pulled and out of play. Severely limiting the options. And the second effect that has is the fact that if your opponent has the monster on the field that's the same extra type as one of the monsters that they have banished, aka Fusion Sequel Xyz, because this card was written before Links was a thing, so Links were not taken into account with this card. Don't know if they will ever fix this card for that, but that means, hey, you got a synchro, and that means just detach material, give you back this bad synchro that I banished from you, and now I can destroy your monster. So, again, it just lets you really ruin your opponent's day. Here's a very iconic level 4 Xyz. Dog Rebellion Xyz Dragon. 2500 attack, 3000 defense. If they detach 2 materials, target 1 face up monster your opponent controls, half its attack, and then you gain that last attack. This card's pretty iconic. You've seen a lot of people use it, both in RP and off RP, because again, it lets you get over something big pretty easily. Because even if they start Rebellion, well, hey, 5,000 minus divided by 2 is still 2,500. That's a lot easier to get over. So, there's that. Beyond that, again, after that, it's just a beat stick, but hey, lets you get over everything and then you have a big nasty on your field. Another little pain in the neck a lot of people will recognize. Castell, the Sky Blaster Master tier. Its first effect doesn't matter. Lets you detach one, but lets you target one monster in the opponent's field and changes the face down defense position. Sure, it says Book of Moan, but it's nothing compared to its second effect. At the cost of detaching both materials, target one other face-up card in the field and shuffle it into the deck. Again, have a problem that's on your opponent's side of the field that you need to get rid of? Castell out, detach 2, the problem is gone. It has only 2,000 attack, which isn't great, but hey. It gets rid of a problem, and then it's still a 2k that can more than likely shoot at your opponent's face directly. Then we have my soul level 3, one of the mains, 1500 attack, 2100 defense, it's a shield. But when this card would be destroyed, you can detach a material and protect it. And during the end phase of a turn that this card had used its effect, you can destroy a card in the field. Again, protection, break your opponent's field, makes you last longer, gives you a chance to fight back. And lastly, Sky Cavalry Centuria. I've annoyed some people with this card. It takes 2 level 2s, which again would be my Aina and my Kani, being my only level 2s. But it cannot be destroyed as an Xyz material. With only 2,000 attack and 0 defense, this card is definitely going to be put an attack, but indestructibility by battle places with the second effect, which after the end of the damage step, aka after everyone's gotten hurt, if the opponent's monster is still around, or rather if he's not going to die, then you can choose to just detach a material and send that card back to the hand, or in the case of an extra deck monster, back to the extra deck. Meaning again, another big problem, goodbye, and now hey, I have a monster you still can't kill. Meaning that all that damage you're going to do to me just got cut down by 2,000 points. Meaning I'm more than likely going to live this turn. Needless to say, this deck is smaller than my old one. But that was designed to make a more aggressive deck. Problem is, this deck became quickly tuned out, which is why you're probably not going to see this exact build that much anymore. But hey, that's how it goes. And I hope you all enjoyed it, and I hope I taught you something new. And maybe hopefully, this deck will help you in your own deck building endeavors. I'm not the best builder in the world, but who knows. Still could help. So I hope you all enjoyed. And I hope to see you all next time. Bye-bye.